Roger, thank you so much. Why don't you tell everyone a little more firstly about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I'm the CEO of Care Sante, as you said, an organisation delivering home care services in England. We have several branches in England, and I came into healthcare more generally in 1991, and was actually given the brief to develop Care UK's home care services all the way back in 1996. We had a very small business, and we decided that we would make a play at actually building that. And the strategy that we followed, which was, if it wasn't the first, it was one of the first to actually develop a buy and build strategy, as you said at the outset, which was a combination of buying good businesses in localities which worked for us organisationally, allied to a strategy of seeking to organically grow those businesses, but in particular to develop those businesses through the bidding processes of winning contracts with local authorities and building business that way. We commenced that in early 1996.
Yeah.
We had a kind of platform business in Essex. Around about 5,000 hours a week were being delivered.
Okay.
And over a 12-year period, that business was grown through this strategy to be 125,000 hours over that 12-year period. So very successful period of growth through this strategy. So I thought it would be worthwhile kind of outlining how that worked. A number of companies also tried it, I think with mixed success. We had very strong success. When you buy another business, it's never easy, because that business has been used to its previous owners, its management style, its way of working. You bring it into a more of a corporate regime, and you have to get your arms around it, understand how it works, and actually progressively change it to one which has the right focus, both for the business itself and for you. And I think that, the records show that we did that very successfully. So the to move to, and that would be typically ones which were neighbouring to the areas that in which we were currently operating.
Okay.
If you go too far away from where you are, you run the risk of a management stretch and not being able to cover that. So there's a kind of a building out from the centre kind of notion, linked to which is to look at the operating realities of work on the ground. So, for example, if a local authority contract pricing structure is particularly low, it might not be a particularly attractive area for you to move into. On the other hand, you might see the future potential of something which will need to change because that pricing is too low. And you can actually, if you understand your market and the dynamics that are going on, you can actually potentially look to leverage something more significant out of that in the future. Yeah. So we in KUK typically bought either 3 or maybe 4, usually 3 businesses a year of reasonable substance. Mm-hmm. There were other companies around which bought 12 to 15 organisations a year, often smaller organisations. And the problem with doing that was, first of all, the management couldn't actually cope with that number of businesses. And secondly, when you buy a small business, it only takes a relatively small percent of that business to fall away, which often happens as a result of management change, for you then to lose the bulk of the profitability from that business. So the businesses that you're targeting always need to have a reasonable substance in order that the impact of any short dropout can actually be recovered without a huge impact on the profitability of that business. And we did that very well. We did that progressively over the years, and we moved from an organisation with an Essex base and pretty much solely an Essex base to one which was a national provider. We became the 3rd largest provider in the UK, and that build strategy was linked to the contract wins as well. So we had a successful strategy to respond and win new contracts with new local authorities. and you get the kind of ongoing traction of reputation. You can tell a local authority what you can do. You're building a strong business. You're bringing in a good management team. Our business was always focused on quality. In the end, if you want to develop your service, the quality of that service needs to be good. You need to be able to demonstrate that in your bids. You need to be able to demonstrate that on the ground, and you need to be responsive to the local authorities who are paying you to be a key provider in their areas. And again, we did that very successfully. Yeah. And I kind of replicated that strategy when I moved over to an organisation called Sevacare, and very successfully built that organisation between 2009 and 2014. So I thought it would be useful to
100%.
put that out there.
That's quite a portfolio, really, of success and growth. And going back to Care UK, so, and as you say, from 5,000 hours to 125,000. Not every organisation, not everyone can do that. So what did it take? What did you learn from it? Let's go right to the beginning when you were with Care UK and the home care division. And what did you need, or you think, to be of a certain size to start to say, okay, we need to acquire, or we want to acquire?
I think you need to have funding backing. Obviously, acquisition costs in themselves are require finance behind the organisation. So it rather depends on the organisation. I mean, at the time, KUK was a PLC, so it had good backing from its banks, and we were able to use that loan backing to do so. But in a way, it's replicable regardless of the size. It's all relative. So even if you're a small organisation, if you're in a sound financial situation and your banks are receptive to lending, then you can put the money in. There'll be a smaller contribution from the equity. The beauty of a home care business, of course, is that it demands relatively little capital input. This is about services, and therefore there's a cash flow comes into the business, and as a result, you're generating a fair amount of cash, and therefore you can use that cash for future investments as well. So if you're successful in your growth strategy and winning contracts, then the more cash is coming into the business, which then gives you a greater base for the next step forward, and so on. So you can build that. I think that the area that can't be underestimated is the management of the business and the caliber of the people you have at the top of the organisation who can ensure that what you're trying to do is then delivered. I referred earlier to the quality of service, and that's absolutely imperative. Without that quality of service, you then lose your contracts because the local authorities discover that you're not what you cracked up to be, and therefore you've got to ensure that you've got the structure behind you and the management that enables you to deliver. What we found over the years was that success breeds success. And the more successful you are, the more people want to join you, and therefore you've got a better opportunity to select the best people in the space. And that's linked to understanding the market in which you operate. That's crucial. This is a critical area of service delivery in this country, and one which often gets neglected in favour of the National Health Service, which is unfortunate, because the right delivery of services to people at home is key to resolving the problems that the NHS has got in terms of the capacity of its bed capacity at the moment. If more is ploughed into home care delivery at home, then we've got a better chance of delivering the service to an ageing population in this country. And that's something I'm very passionate about, and have tried to build good home care businesses over time in order to address that very point.
Yeah, and for those listening who are maybe thinking at a certain stage of growth through acquisition or thinking about it, what are the things that can go wrong, or what are the things that you've learned you have to be especially attentive to? For those who are more uninitiated into this model, what are those pitfalls to be particularly acutely aware of?
Yeah, I think the first one, certainly when you're buying a business, is to be very close to that business, to understand it, to understand the people who are running it, managing that, coordinating the work, the care staff, and get close to it, so they feel that they're not just a kind of number on the board and a new company, that they feel a kind of belonging to you as an organization. And that's about very strong support in the early days, in the early times. So you get that kind of relationship developing with the people on the ground. If you don't do that, then you become a kind of remote organization, which locally the people tend to think you don't care enough about that business. So you have to give it the time. And with those companies that bought many businesses a short period of time, that was reflective in a lot of those working out, because the organisation simply couldn't get close enough to those businesses. And we're talking about being pretty close for a concentrated period of 3 months, and then beyond that 6 months, and then a year, still being very close to it. It takes that kind of time for people to get used to being part of you as a new organisation.
And Roger, is that something that you learnt by experience? I bought too quickly and it didn't go as, went wrong or badly, not as well as you liked? Or how did you learn about that balance?
No, actually, I don't know. It was instinctively. I felt that was important. Right. That was important. When you're negotiating to buy businesses, you're talking to the owners. The owners are usually very keen to ensure that their business is going into good hands. Right. So you're having these kinds of conversations to say, we will support it. We will be a good organisation behind it. And they, the owners will often buy into that as a key decision-making process. If you say that, I feel very strongly that you have to deliver on it. You have to do what you can. I mean, things can go wrong. It's not easy, but it wasn't learning from mistakes at all. It was actually feeling that was the right approach to take. And my experience, thinking about one of the most successful things I have done over the years here is because that actually was borne out and turned out to be definitely true, and continues to be the case today in what I'm still doing today. And
then, so when you're buying another home care organisation, what's the role or the contractual role, or how do you make an agreement with the owners on the role that they may or may not take during a certain period of time? How have you implemented, and what have you implemented there?
Most owners are looking to step away, usually retiring and so on, and that works actually, because if you end up with a hybrid, it tends not to work, because you kind of their input's still going on, so they're stepping away. So you've got to be there in place of those people, very immediately, and then gain the trust of the staff locally in you as an organisation, and the people that you have, and build those relationships. And that's crucially important, as is building the relationships with the local authorities as well. Most home care businesses are contracting to a larger or lesser degree with the local authorities, and that's a crucial business relationship, and you've got to remain focused on that too, again, because change of ownership for local authorities is a worrying time. They've typically had a number of years with a previous owner, and that relationship has developed, and therefore they become very nervous if new people are coming in. And again, I was talking before about success breeding success. So if you've done that and got other local authorities that can actually reference you and actually say, these people are good people, they know what they're doing, they can take on a business and continue to be successful with that, then again, you've got the track record that builds over time, which is an important area to pay attention to. You've got to pay attention to the detail. And, at the end of the day, if this is what you're doing and spending your money on, then you need to be focused on looking after the money that you spend and doing the right thing. So that's crucially important.
And tell me a little about the acquisition goes ahead, the owners step away, and then as you talk about building the trust and the confidence of the staff, is there, over the time you've been doing this, is there like a sequence, a timeline of things you do? Tell me a little bit to build that trust to get as quickly as you can. Is there a protocol here that you've adapted to over the years?
I think every business is different. You may buy a business with a very strong manager who is more than willing to come on board to a larger organisation, develop themselves. Again, one of the factors that we sought to promote was promotion itself from within, and to provide people with an opportunity to develop. And over the years, there've been a number of people who've gone from being what was at the time a local branch manager working for a relatively small entrepreneur to becoming a senior player in a large organisation and making that transition. So that's been a really positive for me as a CEO and the business generally to promote and build on over time. There'll be other businesses who've got a relatively inexperienced team that needs greater management input, and you might have to recruit a stronger manager into that team. It very much varies depending from business to business, but you've got to you've got to be very close to the business for that 12-month period. Some will fly earlier, some will take a lot longer. That first 12 months is a crucial time, and this is a difficult industry to be working in, not least of which is the challenge of low pay, especially during times when unemployment is low. So there are a number of job opportunities for people. This isn't the most attractive area to work in terms of caring for others and older people in particular. So there are significant challenges which you've got to be very aware of and be able to respond to, and support the local teams in responding to those challenges and delivering the outcomes and where they want to get to.
Yeah, and in your process of due diligence ahead of making acquisition, tell me a little about that. What you're looking for? Are there what things have you learned? What alarm bells might go off, or what the specific things that for you have been really important when looking into a possible acquisition? Yeah,
good question. As I mentioned before, it needs to be of a reasonable size. First of all, if you acquire something which is too small, and a relatively small percentage of challenge in that business becomes a large percentage of the overall financial return that you will see. It needs to be a reasonable size for you to establish yourself. I think the other one which I also mentioned is proximity to where you are currently operating, so that you can give it the attention that it needs. So it doesn't help if it's hundreds of miles away from where your core operations are or where your nearest operation is. You need to be close enough to be able to do that. And you also need to ensure that you don't get distracted by another acquisition that comes along 3 months later and takes your resources away. So certainly due diligence-wise, size and location is key. I think you also need to get under the bonnet, so to speak, in terms of which resources are really driving the growth and really driving the management of that business. If it is that the outgoing owner is particularly strong, has particularly strong relationships with the local authority, is the driver of new business and so on, then you need to think about that very hard, because you need to replace that person if you want to go ahead. There might be a business which is strongly focused in areas of private work, for example, and again, if the drive for that is with people who are leaving, then you need to be very careful about that, because you can buy a business and discover that the drive for an aspect of that, a strong element of that business's business has then gone, and you might find that you struggle to replace it. So you do need to look very carefully at the structure of the organisation and where its business is coming from.
Yeah, and let's talk about valuations. So when you're going and you're thinking, maybe an offer price, or you're going in afresh and you put in that offer, how do you work out a valuation on a home care business?
Yeah, first of all, the market has its own kind of view of valuations at any one time, so you're somewhat dictated to by the market. But again, that's an interesting question, because when I first started out in home care, for me the key driver was the remaining contract duration with the local authority. So if you're buying a business and its contract runs out in 3 years, if you're prepared to pay a multiple of more than 3 times annual profit, then you're taking a bit of a risk on renewing that contract. Typically, when I started out, home care multiples were 3-4 times, larger for the larger organisations, obviously. As time time moved on, those multiples were bid up. And I remember one particular case where the multiples got into double digits, 10 times, 12 times, and some businesses were bought at that. And for me, it was unrealistic. The cycle was almost certainly going to turn, and companies buying at those multiples were not adequately understanding the market in terms of the risk that was associated with those. And again, I think time has proven was actually the case. There were a lot of businesses bought around about 10 years ago, especially by new entrants into the market. There were quite a few FM companies that came in and they overbought. They bought at inflated prices and they weren't able to make a success of it. So I think you've always got to be mindful of those key drivers that underlie the business. If most local authority contracts run for 5 years, you're taking a gamble if your multiples are going to be north of 5 times. At the moment, multiples for home care businesses are lower than that. Then they're not strong. Which is positive for acquirers. But on the other hand, when you've got a strong business locally, the chances of you being able to renew your contracts are themselves pretty strong, and therefore, you can take some risks in that area at what you buy at. Based on what you think you'll be able to hold on to, and then have a very strong, successful business for a further 5 to 7 years, depending on the contract length.
Yeah, I see. Fascinating. And in terms of profitability of home care organisations, when you are making and were making acquisitions, is there a certain level you like to see, the kind of benchmark?
Yes. I mean, it's relative to the mix of work that the organisation delivers. So your returns from contracted work with local authorities will be typically lower than your returns from private work. So you need to understand the balance between that. But you could find a business with a very strong local authority offering, which maybe overall returns maybe 10% on turnover. It has a very strong contract and a likely ongoing good volume associated with it, which might be a better investment option than another business, perhaps with lower volume, higher private market, which might be returning 20% or more, but which is going to be harder to kind of stick with, depending on that relationship with the throughput of contract and throughput of work. It's quite interesting that you get some businesses which rely quite heavily on a fairly small number of clients, which on the one hand is very good because you haven't got the same kind of capacity constraints and challenges with staffing. But on the other hand, if you lose one of those small number of clients, you've got a problem. You've got a big problem to replace them, which means that you've got to understand that. You've got to strike the right balance between those people, those organisations relying on a small number of clients for their profitability, and those with a much more wider offering. And it's no different in home care, if you think about it, than it is in any other business. If you bought a manufacturing business which was wholly dependent on one contract with one larger organisation, you'd have to think very carefully about its attractiveness.
Fascinating. And tell me some more about these local authority contracts and securing renewals and winning bids. Tell me more about what you've learned about that and best practice.
I mean, anyone will tell you that you have to ensure that you submit your bids in the way in which the local authority wants those bids submitted, which is all the basics about read the question properly and submit things which answer the questions. It's challenging because it's a little bit writing a series of A-level essays of so many words in response to specific questions, some of which there's a skill attached to people who can do that. And one of the criticisms, especially from local authorities and generally, is that sometimes that doesn't necessarily reflect the skills of the organisation. Back in the day, local authorities would always interview as well as accept the bids. And I always used to think that was a positive thing, because you could actually put a face to the name, or the local authorities could, and hear it from you as to what you were prepared to do and feel, the commitment from you. I used to make a point of always going to those, so they could actually know that, this is the CEO of the organisation. It's not just a regional manager whatever. So the local authority could see what you were offering and get a feel for that. These days, there tend to be fewer interviews, which I think is unfortunate, because then the decisions are based on those bids alone. And it's not always that easy to get your points across in a way which makes a difference. A lot of local authorities will talk about the way in which services need to develop and change. Home care services tend to be delivered on a time and task basis, as it's called, where the local authorities commission specific calls at specific times for specific durations, which gives you little scope for more imaginative service deliveries, which actually drags service quality down, to be honest, and is very detrimental.
Yeah,
so we talk about how to deliver services differently in contract responses. Unfortunately, for the most part, local authorities continue to commission in the same way, despite asking bidders to put in more imaginative bids when they apply for the contracts. But that's still being worked on. It's one of my biggest frustrations in life, that having spoken about changing the model of service delivery for the best part of 20 years, we're still not a great deal further on. Everyone's still talking about it, so there is that. I for one continue to try and make those changes.
Well, this has been fascinating. I know we'll be gaining a lot from this. Now, is there anything, Roger, that you've not up to now that you've not touched on that you feel is important to convey?
Well, it's how long's a piece of string in many ways on him, but no, I think relative to the area that we wanted to focus on today, I think I've covered that. And there's so many complexities with this service. It's such a valuable service. It's a very underestimated service in society, this, and therefore, the more that we talk about it and get these kinds of podcasts and other things out there, so much the better. It's very important.
Yeah,
I'm happy.
Oh, great, and of course the sector generally, the elderly sector is just such a great one to work in. There are people just doing extraordinarily good work, and just on a very general point, how we care for our elderly and infirm and senior citizens is just so important. So I think you've obviously just conveyed that passion for working in the sector as well, which is something I think we all share. So Roger, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a great episode, and I look forward now to getting it through to the editors.
Pleasure. Many thanks.
Great, Roger. Thank you.